Sold to the highest bidder, Isabella stood exposed, humiliation seeping into her bones. Just as the final gavel was about to fall, the doors slammed open. A man, tall and cold, strode in, his eyes locked on her. £400, he declared, and the auction house went silent. The Duke's voice rang clear, and in a flash, he was lifting her from the platform, rescuing her from a fate worse than death. But why had he paid double the price? What did he really want from her? The answer would change everything. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Auction. The wooden platform was cold beneath Isabella's bare feet. Each splinter, a small indignity added to the greater horror. She kept her eyes fixed on a water stain on the far wall of the auction house, anything to avoid the faces below, the men who studied her like livestock at Smithfield Market. 22 years of age, the auctioneer droned, his voice carrying through the smoke-thick air. Educated reads and writes, some French, unblemished skin, good teeth, pleasing countenance. A man in the front row, Mr. Garrett, she thought. Someone who had once dined at their table leaned forward with interest. Let's see her smile, then. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The sound wrapped around Isabella's throat like a noose. She did not smile. The air reeked of unwashed bodies, cheap gin, and something else, the particular desperation that clung to places where human beings were reduced to their monetary value. Rain drummed against the grimy windows, but inside, the press of bodies made the room stifling despite the October chill. Edward will care for you, her mother had whispered 2 years ago, her hand cold in Isabella's grip. Promise me you'll let him care for you. Isabella had promised. She had believed. What a fool she had been. The day after the funeral, Edward's mask had slipped. The concerned stepfather had vanished, replaced by a man whose eyes held calculation instead of compassion. Within a week, she understood. Her mother had been the shield, and now Isabella stood exposed to a man who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. Or, as it turned out, sold. We'll start the bidding at £50, the auctioneer announced, snapping Isabella back to the present horror. A bargain for such quality, gentlemen. Trained for household management, decorative enough for £60. A voice from the middle of the room. Isabella's hands trembled. They weren't bound with rope, there was no need. The humiliation itself was binding enough, chains forged from shame and powerlessness. 75. Another voice, rougher. Her books had been sold first. The leather-bound volumes her father, her real father, Harold Worthington, had given her. Then her mother's jewellery, the few pieces that had survived Margaret's first marriage. Then the house staff, let go one by one until only old Mrs. Davies remained, weeping as she packed her things. £100. Mr. Grimshaw's voice cut through her memories. She knew him, Edward's primary creditor, a man whose business interests existed in the murky spaces where legality blurred. His eyes were hungry as they travelled over her, and Isabella felt her skin crawl. The bidding continued. 120, 150. Men called out numbers, reducing her entire existence to pounds and shillings. 3 days in the cellar had prepared her for this, Edward had said. 3 days in the dark with only bread and water, until she was too weak to fight when they came for her, until she understood that resistance was futile, that she had no choices left. £200. Grimshaw's voice rang with triumph. In the corner, partially hidden by shadow, Edward Worthington nodded eagerly. His face gleamed with sweat and relief. £200 would satisfy some of his debts, buy him time with the others. That his stepdaughter's life would be destroyed in the process clearly troubled him not at all. The auctioneer raised his gavel, the sound of it soon to fall like a judge's sentence. £200 from Mr. Grimshaw. Going once. Isabella closed her eyes. Whatever came next, she would endure. She would survive. She would. The doors burst open with such force that they slammed against the walls, the bang echoing through the suddenly silent room like a gunshot. Every head turned. A man strode through the entrance, rain glistening on his dark hair, his Hessian boots clicking against the warped floorboards with the steady rhythm of inevitability. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in evening clothes that spoke of wealth so secure it needed no ostentation. His face was all sharp angles and harder resolve, his eyes dark and seeing everything, the smoke, the leering men, the girl on the platform trying desperately to disappear. Duke Frederick Ashford. Even Isabella, isolated as she had been these past years, recognized him. Everyone knew the Duke of Ashford, the man who had vanished to the continent for 3 years and returned harder, colder, moving through society like a blade through silk. He did not pause, did not survey the room or acknowledge the shocked silence. He simply walked forward until he stood before the platform, his eyes finally meeting Isabella's. £400. His voice was clear, cold, final. Gasps erupted throughout the room. The auctioneer's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Grimshaw half rose from his seat, face purple with outrage. In the corner, Edward's expression transformed from relief to greedy delight. Already calculating this unexpected windfall, the Duke climbed the 3 steps to the platform with deliberate precision. Isabella stood frozen as he removed his coat, fine black wool that smelled of sandalwood and rain, and something indefinably clean, a sharp contrast to the stench surrounding her. He draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body, and so heavy it nearly buckled her knees. It fell past her hands, drowning her small frame, but it covered the thin shift that had been her only garment, covered the shame of her exposure. For the first time since being dragged from the cellar, Isabella felt almost human. The Duke's eyes met hers, and something flickered in their depths recognition, perhaps, not of her specifically, but of her humanity, and beneath that, rage, carefully contained, but burning nonetheless. "Can you walk?" His voice was gentler than she expected, though still edged with steel. Isabella tried to answer, but her throat had closed. She managed a nod. She took 1 step forward. Her legs, weakened by days in the cellar and the shock of the past hour, trembled violently. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Without hesitation, without asking permission, the Duke bent and lifted her into his arms, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. She weighed nothing to him, she realized distantly. Or perhaps he was simply that strong. Isabella should have protested, should have insisted she could manage. But she was so tired, and he was warm, and for the first time in 3 days, 3 years, if she was honest, she felt safe. He turned and walked through the crowd, which parted before him like the Red Sea before Moses. Men who had been calling out bids moments ago now could not meet his eyes. "Your Grace," Edward's voice rang out, too loud, too eager. He pushed through the crowd, hand extended. "A pleasure doing business with you. Perhaps we might discuss." The Duke stopped walking. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "If you ever approach her again," he said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the auction house, "business or otherwise, I will ruin you so thoroughly your creditors will seem merciful. Am I understood?" Edward's face drained of color. His extended hand fell to his side. Yes, your Grace. Understood." The Duke did not acknowledge the response. He simply resumed walking, carrying Isabella toward the door, toward the rain, toward whatever came next. The last thing Isabella saw before they passed through the doorway was Grimshaw's furious face and Edward's fearful one, and she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Only a vast emptiness where emotion should be. The night air hit her like a baptism, cold rain on her face, washing away the stench of the auction house. The Duke's carriage waited, black and imposing, a driver holding the door open with careful neutrality. The Duke climbed in with her still in his arms, settling onto the leather seat and arranging his coat more securely around her. Only then did he set her beside him, maintaining a careful distance. The driver closed the door. The carriage lurched forward. Isabella sat in the darkness, wrapped in a stranger's coat that smelled of sandalwood and safety, and tried to comprehend what had just happened. She had been sold. She had been bought. She had been rescued. But rescued for what purpose? Men did not pay £400, double the highest bid, for altruistic reasons. They did not carry strange women away from auction houses out of simple kindness. What did the Duke of Ashford want from her? She turned to look at him, to ask the question, but found him staring out the rain-streaked window, his profile harsh in the intermittent lamplight. His jaw was clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. His hands, which had held her so carefully, were now fisted on his thighs. He looked, Isabella realized with shock, furious, not at her, at the situation, at the world that had led to this moment. "Where are we going?" Her voice came out as a whisper, rusty from disuse. He turned to face her, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Somewhere safe," he said. "I promise you that, at least. Somewhere safe." Isabella wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the sincerity she heard in his voice, but trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Still, she had no choice but to let the carriage carry her forward into the unknown. It could hardly be worse than what she was leaving behind. The rain continued to fall as London's dark streets rolled past the window, washing the city clean, or trying to, at least. Some stains, Isabella knew, went too deep for rain to reach. Chapter 2. Sanctuary and Secrets. The carriage rolled through London's rain-soaked streets in silence broken only by thunder. Isabella sat rigid against the leather seat, acutely aware of the Duke's presence across from her, close enough to be proper, far enough to be respectful. He had not touched her since settling her onto the seat, had not spoken since his promise of safety. She pulled his coat tighter around herself, breathing in the scent of sandalwood that clung to the wool. Her mind felt fractured, unable to process what had happened. One moment she had been standing on that platform, waiting for the gavel to fall and seal her fate. The next, she was here, rescued by a man she did not know, for reasons she could not fathom. Men did not spend £400 without expecting something in return. The thought made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Lightning illuminated the carriage interior, and she caught a glimpse of the Duke's face. He was staring out the window, his jaw tight, that muscle still ticking in his cheek. Anger radiated from him like heat from a forge, but she hoped it was not directed at her. The carriage finally stopped before a townhouse in Mayfair. Even through the rain and darkness, Isabella could see it was elegant, 4 stories of honey-colored stone, windows glowing with warm light. The kind of house she had lived in once, before her mother married Edward, before everything fell apart. The driver opened the door. The Duke descended first, then turned to offer his hand. Isabella hesitated before placing her trembling fingers in his. His grip was firm but gentle, steadying her as she stepped down onto rain-slicked cobblestones. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her late 50s wearing a housekeeper's black dress and white apron. She had a round, kind face and eyes that immediately took in every detail: the Duke's coat, wrapped around a shivering girl, the bare feet, the haunted expression. "Your Grace, I wasn't expecting." She stopped mid-sentence, her expression transforming from surprise to shock to something softer. "Oh, you poor lamb." The simple kindness in those words nearly undid Isabella. She swayed slightly, and the Duke's hand moved to her elbow, supporting without grasping. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Isabella Worthington. She'll be staying with us. She needs a room prepared immediately, the Rose bedroom, I think. Hot water, clean clothes, and something to eat." Mrs. Winters nodded briskly, already moving into action. "Of course, Your Grace. Right away." She turned to Isabella, her voice gentling. "Come with me, dear. Let's get you warm and dry." But Isabella's legs had finally given out. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the auction, through the rescue, through the carriage ride, had evaporated. She felt the Duke's arms catch her before she fully registered she was falling. "I've got you," he murmured, lifting her again as though she weighed nothing. "Mrs. Winters, lead the way." Isabella wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but she had no strength left. She let her head rest against his shoulder as he carried her up the stairs, aware of Mrs. Winters hurrying ahead, opening doors, issuing orders to unseen servants. The Rose bedroom was aptly named. Soft pink wallpaper, darker rose curtains, a 4-poster bed with cream-colored linens that looked impossibly clean and soft. A fire already crackled in the hearth, and Isabella could see a hip bath being filled with steaming water behind a screen. The Duke set her carefully in a chair before the fire. "Mrs. Winters will take care of you. I'll return shortly." He left before Isabella could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Mrs. Winters moved with efficient compassion, helping Isabella out of the Duke's coat and the thin, shameful shift beneath. She made no comment on the bruises from Edward's rough handling, from the cellar's stone floor, but her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. The bath was bliss. Isabella sank into the hot water, letting it envelope her, wash away the stench of the auction house and 3 days of captivity. Mrs. Winters had added something that smelled of lavender, clean and calming. "Let's wash your hair, dear," Mrs. Winters said gently, and Isabella submitted to the maternal care, too exhausted to do anything but accept it. Afterward, wrapped in a soft nightgown and thick dressing gown, both far too large, probably borrowed from the household stores, Isabella was settled back in the chair before the fire. Mrs. Winters brought a tray, soup that smelled of chicken and herbs, fresh bread still warm, tea with honey. "You need to eat, miss," Mrs. Winters encouraged, setting the tray on a small table beside the chair. Isabella stared at the food. Her stomach was empty, had been nearly empty for days, but the thought of eating made her feel ill. Her hands, wrapped around the teacup, would not stop shaking. The trembling had started in the carriage and had only intensified, as though her body was finally releasing the terror she had suppressed. Mrs. Winters watched her with concern but did not push. "I'll leave you to rest then. Ring if you need anything. Anything at all." After she left, Isabella sat motionless, watching the flames dance in the hearth. The fire's warmth seeped into her bones, but she could not seem to get truly warm, could not seem to feel anything beyond a vast, hollow numbness. A soft knock at the door. "Miss Worthington, may I enter?" The Duke's voice. Isabella's throat closed, but she managed a quiet, "Yes." He entered, changed from his evening clothes into simpler attire, dark trousers, white shirt, a burgundy waistcoat. He looked younger, without the formal coat, more human. He carried 2 glasses and a crystal decanter of amber liquid. "You should eat," he said, noting the untouched tray. "But I suspect you can't. Not yet." He sat in the chair across from her, not beside her, maintaining that careful distance, and poured measures of brandy into both glasses. "This will help with the shaking." He held out a glass. Isabella took it with trembling hands, nearly spilling it. The Duke made no move to help, allowing her the dignity of managing it herself. The brandy burned going down, but he was right, it helped. A different kind of warmth, spreading from her stomach outward. They sat in silence for several minutes, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Isabella found her voice. It came out rusty, barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The Duke was quiet for a long moment, swirling the brandy in his glass, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was level, deliberate. "Nothing. I want nothing from you." "Then why?" The question burst from her, desperate. "Why spend £400? Why bring me here? People don't do things like that without reason." He set down his glass and leaned forward slightly, though still maintaining distance. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw something in them, old pain, barely healed wounds. "8 years ago," he began, his voice low, "my sister Beatrice fell in love with our music master. He was a good man, talented, kind, from a decent family, but not noble, not wealthy, not acceptable in my father's eyes." Isabella listened, watching the way his jaw tightened, his hands flexed. "My father discovered them. Letters, a stolen kiss in the garden, innocent things, really. But my father saw only disgrace. He destroyed the music master, had him imprisoned on false charges of theft. The man died in that prison of gale fever within 3 months." Isabella's breath caught. "Beatrice was sent to the country, to our estate in Northumberland. Exile, my father called it. Protection from scandal. She was there 6 months before." He stopped, swallowed. "They said it was fever. The physician wrote it in his report, influenza, complications, very sad. But I knew better. I had received her letters. She died of a broken heart and my father's cruelty." "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered, the words inadequate but sincere. "I was in London when it happened, at university, playing at being a gentleman, while my sister wasted away because my father valued reputation over his own daughter's happiness. I didn't fight for her, didn't challenge him. I was a coward." He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew something, a miniature portrait. He stared at it for a moment before holding it out to Isabella. The girl in the painting was perhaps 18, with dark hair and eyes like the Duke's, but where his held steel, hers held light. She was smiling, her expression full of life and hope. "She looks kind," Isabella said softly, handing the portrait back. She was. Too kind for the world she was born into. He tucked the portrait away. "When I heard about the auction, a business associate mentioned it, thought I might be interested in acquiring quality goods. I felt ill. When I arrived and saw you standing there." He stopped, his expression hardening. "I cannot bring Beatrice back, but I could ensure you didn't suffer her fate." Understanding dawned. Isabella was not just herself to him, she was also a ghost he was trying to save. A second chance he had not asked for but would not waste. "What happens now?" she asked, the question terrifying but necessary. "To me?" He met her eyes directly. "That is entirely your choice. You may stay here, under my protection, until you decide what you want. I can arrange passage elsewhere if you prefer the continent, the Americas, wherever you wish to go. Or you may simply stay here, safely, for as long as you need. You owe me nothing, Miss Worthington. Not gratitude, not service, not anything. You are free." The use of her name, not girl, or the merchandise, or any of the degrading terms she had heard that evening, but her actual name, spoken with respect, broke something inside her. The numbness cracked, and everything she had suppressed came flooding through. The horror of the auction, Edward's betrayal, her mother's death, the years of slow cruelty, the 3 days in the cellar, the fear and shame and helplessness, all of it poured out in wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. The Duke did not move from his chair, did not try to touch her or offer physical comfort, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady and certain, an anchor in the storm. "You are safe here, I give you my word. No one will hurt you again." Isabella wept until she had no tears left, until exhaustion dragged her down into something approaching peace. The fire had burned low. Dawn light was beginning to filter through the rain-washed windows, pale and new. Her eyes closed. She felt something soft settle over her, a blanket, carefully tucked around her shoulders, heard the quiet click of a door closing. When the Duke returned to his study, the house was silent. He poured another measure of brandy and sat at his desk, pulling out the miniature portrait once more. Beatrice smiled up at him. "Forever 18, forever hopeful." "I'm sorry I failed you, Bea," he whispered to the painted face. "But I won't fail her. I promise you that." He set the portrait on his desk where he could see it, and watched the rain streak down the windows as London woke to a new day. Upstairs, Isabella Worthington slept deeply for the first time in 3 days, wrapped in borrowed warmth, in a house that smelled of beeswax and safety, dreaming of nothing at all. Chapter 3. The Dowager's Gambit. 1 week had passed since the auction, and Isabella had learned the geography of safety. She rose at dawn, before the household stirred, and walked in the walled garden behind Ashford House. The autumn roses were fading, their petals scattered across flagstone paths, but Isabella found beauty in their decay. There was honesty in it. Things ended, changed, transformed into something else. She spent her mornings in the Duke's library, a room of dark wood and leather-bound books that smelled of paper and tobacco. She read voraciously, hungrily, trying to fill the hollow places inside herself with words, philosophy, poetry, history, anything to keep her mind occupied, to prevent it from drifting back to that platform, those leering faces, the sound of the auctioneer's voice. The Duke Felix, as he had asked her to call him in private, though she still could not quite manage it, left her largely alone during the day. He had business to attend to, estates to manage, a life that had existed before her and would continue regardless of her presence. But each evening they shared dinner in the small dining room rather than the formal one, and they talked, carefully, always carefully, like two people navigating around something fragile and undefined. He asked about her reading, she asked about his work. They discussed books and politics and the weather, anything but the question that hung between them. What happens next? "You remind me of Her Grace in her youth," Mrs. Winters had said that morning, helping Isabella dress. The housekeeper had found several simple day dresses that fit reasonably well, though they required some alteration. "The late Duchess, I mean. His Grace's grandmother. Sharp as a tack, that one, and twice as determined." It was a cryptic comment, and before Isabella could ask what she meant, Mrs. Winters had bustled off to attend to some household matter. Isabella was in the library that afternoon, curled in a leather chair with a volume of Milton, when she heard the commotion downstairs. Raised voices, one commanding and female, one belonging to the butler protesting that His Grace was not receiving visitors. The library door opened without preamble. Felix entered, his expression caught between exasperation and resignation. "My grandmother has arrived." Unannounced, naturally. "She's brought Lady Constance Fairfax with her." Isabella's stomach clenched. She had known this reckoning would come. A duke could not simply install a strange woman in his household without society taking notice, and the Dowager Duchess of Ashford was, by all accounts, society personified. "Should I?" Isabella started to rise. I could go upstairs. No. Felix's voice was firm. You live here. You have every right to be present. He paused, then added more gently. But I won't force you to face her if you're not ready. Isabella thought of the auction platform, of standing while men assessed her value. She had survived that. Surely she could survive a drawing-room confrontation. I'll come, she said, setting down the book. The Dowager Duchess Josephine Ashford was everything Isabella had imagined and more. She sat in the drawing-room like a queen holding court, her posture perfect despite her advanced years. She wore dove-grey silk, her white hair arranged in an elaborate style that should have looked ridiculous but somehow appeared regal. Her eyes were the same dark shade as Felix's, but where his held banked rage, hers held calculation sharp enough to cut. Beside her sat a young woman who could only be Lady Constance Fairfax. She was breathtakingly beautiful, golden hair, porcelain skin, features arranged in perfect proportion. She wore a gown of pale blue that matched her eyes and probably cost more than Isabella's entire wardrobe had once been worth. Those blue eyes traveled over Isabella with barely concealed contempt. Frederick, the Dowager's voice could have etched glass. How kind of you to finally join us. I've been sitting here for a full 10 minutes listening to your butler's excuses. Grandmother, Felix's tone was carefully neutral. What an unexpected pleasure, Lady Constance. He nodded to the younger woman, who smiled with practiced sweetness. Your Grace, Constance's voice was like honey over steel. It's been far too long. 3 years since you left for the continent? I was beginning to think you'd forgotten London entirely. The implication was clear, forgotten her entirely. There was history here, Isabella realized. Expectations, perhaps. Understandings that had been left unfinished when Felix had fled to Europe after his sister's death. Yes, well. The Dowager cut through the pleasantries like a knife through butter. Shall we address the matter at hand? The entire ton is speculating, Frederick. You purchase a girl from an auction house and install her in your home. What precisely are your intentions? Isabella stood by the doorway, still unnoticed or perhaps deliberately ignored. She watched Felix's jaw tighten. My intentions, he said carefully, are to offer protection to someone who needed it. How charitable, Constance interjected, her smile never wavering. Though one does wonder what sort of woman ends up in such circumstances, surely there must have been some contributing factors. The implication was venomous. Isabella felt it sting even across the room. Women who were sold at auction must have deserved it, somehow must have been foolish or wanton or brought ruin upon themselves. Lady Constance, Felix's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Enough. The Dowager raised one elegant hand. Where is this girl? I wish to meet her. One cannot make assessments based on gossip alone. Felix's eyes found Isabella's across the room. She saw the question there she could still leave, still retreat upstairs, but something in her refused. She had been running, hiding, for too long. Isabella stepped forward into the light. I am here, Your Grace. The Dowager's gaze fixed on her with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Isabella forced herself to meet those eyes, to stand straight despite the simple day dress Mrs. Winters had found her, despite her too pale face and the shadows that still haunted her sleep. Come here, child. Let me see you properly. Isabella crossed the room, aware of Constance's measuring look, of Felix's tension. She stopped at a respectful distance and curtsied not deeply, not obsequiously, but with the proper acknowledgement of rank. Closer. The Dowager gestured impatiently. Isabella obeyed, standing before the older woman's chair. The Dowager studied her with unnerving thoroughness, her face, her posture, her hands, everything. Your name? Isabella Worthington, Your Grace. Your family? My father, Harold Worthington, died when I was 8. My mother remarried Lord Edward Worthington. She passed 2 years ago. Education? I had a governess until I was 16. I read French adequately, play the pianoforte moderately well, and have studied literature and history extensively. How did you come to be at that auction house? The question was direct, brutal. Constance leaned forward slightly, anticipation in her eyes. Isabella could have lied, could have softened the truth, made herself more palatable. But she was so tired of pretending, of hiding. My stepfather accumulated significant debts through gambling and poor investments. When my mother died, I became inconvenient. He sold everything of value in the household, including eventually me, to satisfy his creditors. Silence. The Dowager's expression remained unreadable. You were kept in the house during this time? Yes, Your Grace. Until 3 days before the auction, when I was locked in the cellar to discourage resistance. She heard Felix's sharp intake of breath, though she had not told him that detail before. Constance laughed, a brittle, crystalline sound. How Gothic, though one must wonder if such dramatic circumstances weren't somewhat embellished. Damaged goods often come with dramatic stories, I've found. Lady Constance, Felix's voice was ice, but Isabella did not look away from the dowager. I am not embellishing, my lady, nor am I minimizing. These are simply the facts of what occurred. The dowager leaned back slightly, something shifting in her expression. You have courage, child, and intelligence. These can be cultivated. She turned to Felix. Leave us. You as well, Constance. I wish to speak with Miss Worthington privately. Grandmother, Felix began. Now, Frederick. Constance rose gracefully, her smile fixed but her eyes furious. Of course, Your Grace. Come, Duke Ashford. Perhaps you can show me the gardens. I recall they were quite lovely. Felix hesitated, his gaze on Isabella. She managed a slight nod she would be all right. Finally, he left, Constance's hand possessively on his arm. When the door closed, the dowager gestured to the chair Constance had vacated. Sit, child. My neck aches from looking up at you. Isabella sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. I will be direct, as I suspect you prefer it, the dowager began. My grandson has created a scandal by bringing you here. Society will tear you apart if given the opportunity. They will assume the worst, that you are his mistress, that you are a fortune hunter, that you somehow entrapped him. The truth of your circumstances will not matter to them. I know, Isabella said quietly. However, the dowager's eyes glinted, I did not become Duchess of Ashford by accepting society's limitations. I see something in you, Miss Worthington. Potential, perhaps, or simply stubbornness, which is nearly as valuable. She paused, studying Isabella's face. I propose this. You will come to my country estate. You will be educated in society's ways, proper deportment, conversation, all the ridiculous rules that govern our world. If you prove yourself capable, I will sponsor your re-entry into society. I will make you acceptable. Isabella's breath caught. It was more than she had imagined, more than she deserved. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you do this for me? The dowager was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Because I once knew a girl not unlike you. She had potential but no opportunity, courage but no advocate. I failed her. Her gaze sharpened, focusing back on Isabella. I won't fail twice. Isabella struggled to find words. I don't know what to say. Say yes or no. I have little patience for dithering. It's too much to ask of Isabella, Felix said, re-entering the room without knocking. Evidently, he had been listening at the door. She's been through enough without being thrown into society's arena. But Isabella was already shaking her head. This was her choice, her decision. For the first time in years, she had agency. Why would you do this for me? She asked the dowager again, needing to understand. The older woman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because strength should be rewarded, not punished. Because intelligence should be cultivated, not wasted. And because my grandson sees something in you worth saving, which means there is something there worth finding. Isabella looked at Felix, who stood tense and conflicted by the door, then back to the dowager. I accept, she said clearly. Thank you, Your Grace. The dowager nodded, satisfied. Excellent. We leave in 3 days. That should give you time to prepare. She rose, and Isabella hastily stood as well. I expect dedication, Miss Worthington. I expect you to work harder than you have ever worked. Can you do that? Yes, Your Grace. Good. The dowager swept toward the door, pausing beside Felix. She has spine, Frederick. Don't let anyone break it. Then she was gone, leaving Isabella and Felix alone. You didn't have to accept, Felix said quietly. You could have said no. I know. Isabella met his eyes. But I'm tired of being a victim. Your grandmother is offering me a chance to be something else. That evening, Isabella found Felix in the library. He was standing by the window, staring out at the darkening garden. I brought you something, he said without turning. He crossed to his desk and picked up a leather-bound volume, holding it out to her. Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. I thought you might appreciate it. Isabella took the book, touched. You've been paying attention. More than I intended to, he admitted, and something in his voice made her heart stutter. 3 days later, Isabella stood in the entrance hall of Ashford House with her small bag of belongings. The dowager's carriage waited outside. Felix walked her to the door. "If you need anything, if my grandmother is too demanding, or if you simply wish to return, send word. I'll come for you." "I'll be fine," Isabella said, with more confidence than she felt. "I know you will." He paused, then added quietly, "I'll miss our dinners." "As will I." The dowager appeared in the doorway. "Come along, Miss Worthington. We have a schedule to keep." Isabella took one last look at Felix, standing in the doorway of the house that had become her sanctuary. Then she climbed into the carriage, and London began to fall away behind them. Neither of them acknowledged what they both already felt, that saying goodbye, even temporarily, hurt more than it should. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. Ashford Park sprawled across the Hertfordshire countryside like a jewel in an emerald setting. The estate house itself was Elizabethan, all honey-coloured stone and leaded windows, surrounded by formal gardens that even in early spring showed signs of magnificent design. Isabella had arrived in late winter when everything was dormant, waiting. Now, 6 weeks later, the first crocuses were pushing through the soil, and she understood the metaphor all too well. She was being rebuilt from the ground up. Mornings began at 6 with Monsieur Archambault, the deportment instructor the dowager had imported from Paris. He was a thin, severe man, with an eagle eye for posture and a wooden pointer he rapped against furniture when Isabella's shoulders drooped even slightly. "Non, non, a lady does not slouch. The spine is straight, the shoulders back but relaxed. You are not a soldier, mademoiselle, but neither are you a sack of grain." Again. Isabella would walk the length of the ballroom with books balanced on her head, 3 at first, then 5, then an entire stack that threatened to topple with each step. Her neck ached constantly for the first week, but gradually the correct posture became natural, automatic. After deportment came dance lessons with Mr. Pemberton, a rotund master from London who played the pianoforte with surprising grace and called out instructions in a booming voice. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Light on your feet, Miss Worthington. You are dancing with a duke, not wrestling a bear. Isabella learned the waltz, the quadrille, the cotillion. Her feet developed blisters that Mrs. Winters treated each evening with lavender salve. But Isabella was a dedicated student, absorbing everything with the hunger of someone starving. Each skill mastered was a small victory, a piece of armor against the world that had tried to destroy her. Afternoons were spent with the dowager herself, learning the intricate rules of society. Who could be acknowledged on the street and who required a formal introduction, the precise depth of curtsy for each rank, the art of conversation, how to be engaging without being forward, intelligent without being threatening, memorable without being scandalous. Society is a game, child, the dowager explained one afternoon in her private sitting room. A ridiculous, arbitrary game with rules that make no logical sense, but it is the game we must play, and we play to win. Isabella's natural intelligence shone during these lessons. She could pass the complex social hierarchies, remember the intricate family connections, understand the unspoken rules that governed every interaction. The dowager watched her with satisfaction and something that might have been pride. Lady Constance was also in residence at Ashford Park, ostensibly to assist with Isabella's education. In reality, she was a constant, needling presence, offering barbed compliments, making subtle corrections that undermined Isabella's confidence, positioning herself as the example of everything Isabella was not and never could be. "Oh, Isabella," she would say, her voice dripping with false concern, "you really must work on your vowels. That hint of, well, one can hear you didn't have proper instruction from childhood, but I'm sure with enough practice, no one will notice your background." The implication was always there. Isabella was common, inferior, playing at being something she could never truly become. By the 3rd week, the dowager declared Isabella ready for a small dinner party with local gentry. Nothing too daunting, she assured Isabella. Just 8 guests, an informal evening, a chance to practice her skills in a controlled environment. Isabella was terrified. She dressed carefully in a gown the dowager had commissioned pale green silk that brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Winters had come from London specifically to help with her hair, arranging it in an elegant style that made Isabella look older, more sophisticated. "You'll be wonderful, dear," Mrs. Winters assured her, fastening a simple pearl necklace borrowed from the dowager around Isabella's throat. "Just remember everything you've learned." The evening began well. Isabella was seated between a kindly baronet and a rector's wife, both of whom seemed genuinely pleasant. She managed the correct greetings, navigated the multiple courses without embarrassment, engaged in light conversation about the weather and the upcoming planting season. She was succeeding. She was proving herself. Then Constance struck. "Miss Worthington," she said during a lull in conversation, her voice bright and interested, "you must tell us about your family. The Worthingtons of— where was it again?" "I confess I cannot place the name in Debret's peerage." The table fell silent. Every eye turned to Isabella. Her throat went dry. There was no good answer. The truth was impossible, but a lie would be exposed eventually. My family is not listed in Debret's," she managed. "My father was Harold Worthington, a gentleman of modest means." "How interesting." Constance's smile was sharp as glass. "And you're coming out? Where did you make your debut?" I did not have a formal debut." A matron across the table, Lady Ashcroft, wife of a local magistrate, leaned forward with poorly concealed curiosity. "No debut? How unusual. But surely you were presented at some point. Who were your connections in London?" The questions continued, each one more pointed than the last. Constance had clearly prepared her allies well, coaching them on exactly what to ask. Isabella felt the walls closing in, the careful facade she had built crumbling under the assault. Where had she been educated? By whom? What had her father done? Where exactly had the family resided? Each question was a trap, and Isabella was drowning. "I'm afraid I'm feeling unwell," she heard herself say, her voice sounding distant and strange. "Please excuse me." She rose too quickly, nearly knocking over her wine glass, managed a curtsy that felt graceless and rushed, then fled. The garden was dark and cold, spring evening air biting through the thin silk of her gown. Isabella stumbled to a bench in the rose garden, still dormant, the canes cut back and waiting for warmth, and collapsed onto the stone seat. She had failed the dowager, failed herself, failed Felix. All that work, all those lessons, and she was still just the girl from the auction house, trying desperately to be something she was not. The sobs came violently, wrenching from somewhere deep inside. She was not strong enough for this, would never be strong enough. The past would always drag her back, always expose her, always prove that she did not belong. Isabella. She looked up through tears to find Felix standing on the garden path. He wore evening clothes. Must have just arrived. The dowager had mentioned his weekly visit was tonight, though Isabella had been too nervous about the dinner party to remember. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "May I sit?" She nodded, unable to speak. He sat beside her on the bench, maintaining a careful distance, and said nothing. "Just present, just there." The silence stretched, broken only by Isabella's ragged breathing and the distant sound of nightingales in the hedgerows. Finally, she found her voice. "I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. Every time I think I've moved forward, something drags me back to that auction house. Back to who I really am." "And who is that?" Felix asked gently. "Someone who doesn't belong. Someone playing pretend." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "Your grandmother is wasting her time. I'll never be good enough." Felix was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you know what I think strength is?" Isabella shook her head. "Strength isn't never falling down. It's getting back up." He turned to look at her directly. "And you've gotten up every single day since I met you. After the auction, after the cellar, after years of Edward's cruelty, you got up. That's not weakness, Isabella. That's extraordinary courage. But what if I fail? What if I embarrass your grandmother? Embarrass you? Then you fail. And you try again." His voice was firm. "Isabella, you survived years of cruelty and one of the worst nights imaginable. A dinner party with provincial bores can't defeat you. Not unless you let it." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she was strong enough. "After Beatrice died," Felix said, his voice dropping lower, "I ran away. I went to the continent and spent 3 years drowning in rage and grief. I avoided society, avoided my responsibilities, avoided everything that reminded me of what I'd lost." Isabella listened, watching his profile in the moonlight. "It was my grandmother who finally forced me to return. She told me I could spend my life bitter, destroying myself slowly, or I could use my position to change things, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." He paused. "She gave me purpose again, a reason to get up." Is that what I am? Isabella asked, the question painful but necessary. Your charitable cause? Your reason? No. Felix turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His fingers were warm, strong, steady. It was the first deliberate touch since he had carried her from the auction house. You're the woman who asked me why I remain part of a society I despise, he said. Who challenged me to be better. Who survived things that would have broken most people and still finds the courage to keep trying. You're not my cause, Isabella. His grip tightened slightly. You're becoming my reason. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Felix leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her lips. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. Then he pulled back, releasing her hand, the spell breaking. We should return, he said, his voice rough. Your lessons continue tomorrow. Isabella took a shaky breath, trying to calm her racing pulse. Yes, she said, finding strength in his words, in his presence. They do. The next morning, Isabella requested a private audience with the Dowager. She found her in the morning room, reviewing correspondence. Your Grace, I need to speak with you about last night. The Dowager set down her letters. I am already aware of Lady Constance's behavior. She will be leaving Ashford Park this afternoon. What? Did you think I didn't notice her sabotage? The Dowager's eyes glinted dangerously. That girl forgets her place. She was a guest here on sufferance, and she abused that privilege. But I failed, Isabella protested. I fled the dinner table like a coward. You removed yourself from a situation designed to humiliate you rather than creating a scene. That, child, is called discretion, a quality sorely lacking in Lady Constance. The Dowager stood, approaching Isabella with measured steps. You were ambushed by a jealous woman using social warfare. The fact that you maintained any composure at all speaks well of you. I don't understand. Lady Constance wants my grandson. She has wanted him since they were children, and she believed his absence on the continent was merely a delay in their inevitable union. The Dowager's smile was sharp. She sees you as an obstacle, which means, my dear, you are succeeding far better than you realize. From that day forward, Isabella's education intensified, but something had shifted. She was no longer learning out of fear, but out of determination. Constance's departure had removed a constant source of undermining criticism, and Felix's words had given Isabella something she hadn't possessed before: belief in herself. Felix's weekly visits continued, and each one deepened the connection between them. They walked through the awakening gardens, discussing philosophy and politics. They sat in the library in comfortable silence, reading in adjacent chairs. They talked about everything and nothing, building something neither could quite name but both recognized as precious. 6 weeks after arriving at Ashford Park, Isabella stood before a mirror in her room, preparing for a larger gathering, a proper dinner party with 24 guests. Mrs. Winters had returned from London to assist, and now she stood back, surveying her work with satisfaction. You look like a duchess, she said softly. Isabella studied her reflection. The woman looking back was elegant, poised, confident. She wore a gown of deep sapphire that complemented her coloring. Her hair was arranged in an intricate style. Her posture was perfect, thank you, Monsieur Archambault. But the real change was in her eyes. They no longer held the haunted look of the girl on the auction platform. They held determination. I look like who I might have been, Isabella said slowly, but I'm still who I am. Mrs. Winters smiled. And who you are, dear, is more than good enough. That evening, Isabella descended the staircase to the drawing room where guests were assembling. Felix stood at the bottom, watching her approach, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. You're stunning, he said quietly when she reached him. I'm terrified, she admitted. Then we'll be terrified together, he offered his arm. Shall we? Isabella took it, feeling the strength in him, drawing on it while knowing she possessed her own. The dinner party was a success. Isabella conversed intelligently, danced gracefully, navigated every social pitfall with increasing confidence. When questions arose about her background, she had learned to deflect with grace and honesty. My family circumstances are complicated, but I am grateful for the Dowager's guidance. It was not the whole truth, but it was enough. As the evening drew to a close and guests departed, the Dowager found Isabella in the library. You did well tonight, child. Thank you, Your Grace. You're ready, the Dowager said. Ready to return to London, ready to face society properly. Isabella felt a flutter of fear, but also excitement. When? 1 month. That will give us time to prepare your wardrobe, arrange your introduction. The dowager paused. Are you ready for what comes next? Isabella thought of the auction house, of the cellar, of every moment that had led her here. Thought of Felix's words. Strength is getting back up. Yes, she said. I'm ready. Chapter 5. Convenient Lies. London in the spring was a revelation. Isabella had forgotten, or perhaps had never truly known, how beautiful the city could be when one was not trapped in it. The parks were lush with new growth, the streets bustling with life, the air filled with possibility rather than despair. She returned with the dowager to Ashford House, where Mrs. Winters greeted her like a returning daughter. Felix was away on business in Yorkshire, which Isabella told herself was a relief. She needed time to prepare, to settle, to transform herself from the student at Ashford Park into someone who could face London society. The dowager wasted no time. Within a week, she announced a ball in Isabella's honor. But Your Grace, Isabella protested, surely that's too much attention. Perhaps a smaller gathering. Nonsense. If we hide you away, they'll assume we're ashamed. We announce you to society properly, with all the confidence your position warrants. The dowager's eyes glinted. Besides, I haven't hosted a proper ball in years. I'm rather looking forward to it. The night of the ball, Isabella stood at the top of the grand staircase in Ashford House, her hands trembling despite Monsieur Archambault's lessons echoing in her mind. The gown the dowager had commissioned was a masterpiece cream silk with delicate gold embroidery, cut to perfection, making Isabella look elegant and refined without trying too hard. Ready? The dowager asked beside her. No, Isabella admitted, but I'll do it anyway. They descended together, and the ballroom fell silent. Every eye in the room fixed on Isabella, assessing, judging, speculating. She felt exposed in a way that echoed the auction house, but she forced herself to keep breathing, to maintain the posture and grace she had learned. Then the moment passed. The music resumed. People returned to their conversations, though Isabella could feel the weight of their curiosity. The evening unfolded like a dream. Men requested dances, young sons of peers, older gentlemen seeking conversation, even a viscount who complimented her French when she responded to his greeting. Women engaged her in discussion about books, music, the upcoming season, at the opera. Isabella was poised, charming, intelligent, without being threatening. She was succeeding. Felix arrived late, still in travelling clothes, having ridden hard from Yorkshire when he received word of the ball. Isabella saw him enter, saw the way he paused in the doorway, his eyes searching the crowd until they found her. The look on his face made her breath catch pride, certainly, but something deeper. Something that made her heart pound in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness about society. He watched from the periphery as she danced, as she conversed, as she navigated the intricate social waters, never approaching, never interfering, just present. But the whispers persisted. Who is her family, really? The dowager's charity project? I heard. She's lovely. But where has she been these past years? Rather mysterious circumstances, don't you think? Isabella heard fragments as she moved through the ballroom, each whisper a small cut. But she had learned to smile through discomfort, to deflect questions with grace, to survive. The ball was declared a success by the society papers the next morning. Miss Isabella Worthington was a charming addition to the season, with impeccable manners and considerable wit. But success, Isabella was learning, only made some people more determined to see her fail. Felix's mother, the Duchess of Ashford, arrived in London 3 days after the ball. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, cold and elegant as a marble statue. She had not attended the ball a deliberate snub, but she was here now with explicit purpose. Felix told Isabella about the confrontation later, his jaw tight with anger. His mother had summoned him to White's, the gentleman's club, where she had taken the unprecedented step of demanding entrance to speak with her son. The scandal of it alone should have deterred her, but the Duchess was nothing if not determined. Lady Constance is a suitable match, she had said without preamble, well-bred, appropriate age, eager to fulfill her duties. This dalliance with your grandmother's project must end, Frederick. Isabella is not a project, Felix had replied, his voice dangerously quiet. And I'll marry when and whom I choose. You're 30 years old. Your grandmother indulges your eccentricities, but duty must prevail. You need an heir, connections, a duchess who understands her role. I understand my duty, mother. Better than you think. Do you? Or are you so determined to punish me for your father's sins that you'd throw away your future on some girl of uncertain origins? Felix had left without responding, but the words had lodged in him like thorns. That same afternoon, Isabella attended a ladies' tea at Lady Pemberton's townhouse. It seemed innocent enough an opportunity to further establish herself among the women of society. The dowager had encouraged her to go, to continue building connections. The drawing room was lovely, filled with spring flowers and gentle conversation. Isabella relaxed slightly, discussing a recent exhibition at the Royal Academy with Lady Sarah Thornton, a kind woman near her own age. Then she realized she'd left her gloves in the retiring room upstairs. "Excuse me a moment," she murmured, slipping away. She retrieved the gloves and was returning down the hallway when she heard voices from the drawing room, the door slightly ajar, the conversation carrying. "Really, the dowager means well, but polish can only do so much." Lady Constance's voice, unmistakable. Isabella froze in the hallway. "The girl was purchased at auction. I heard it from unimpeachable sources. Damaged goods. Literally. The Duke's charity is admirable, certainly, but imagine if he actually formed an attachment. The scandal would be delicious." Laughter rippled through the room, not everyone, but enough. "Surely even he isn't that foolish," another voice added. "A man of his position must marry appropriately. This girl is a temporary amusement at best." More laughter. Someone mentioned passing fancy and inappropriate charity. Isabella stood frozen in the hallway, the gloves clutched in her hand, hearing every word. The humiliation was crushing, worse than the auction, in some ways, because she had allowed herself to hope, had allowed herself to believe she could belong here. She could not go back into that room, could not face those smiling faces knowing what they truly thought of her. Isabella slipped down the servants' stairs and out a side entrance, calling for a hackney rather than using the dowager's carriage. She could not bear the kindness of the servants right now, the concerned questions. Back at Ashford House, she went directly to her room in the family wing and pulled out her small travelling bag, the same one she'd brought from the auction house, still tucked in the wardrobe. She was packing when Felix knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Isabella, what's happened?" "Mrs. Winters said you came back from Lady Pemberton's in a state. I need to leave London." Her voice was mechanical, distant. "Perhaps the dowager can find me a position somewhere quiet, a governess, or a companion to an elderly lady. Somewhere I won't be a burden." "What happened?" He crossed to her, gentle but insistent. "Tell me." Something in his voice, the genuine concern, the care, broke through her defenses. "I'm ruining you," she said, and her voice cracked. "Your mother is right. Every moment I remain in your life, I damage your reputation. You've been so kind. Your grandmother has been generous, but I cannot repay that kindness by destroying you. You heard something at the tea. It wasn't a question. Tell me." She recounted the conversation, each word like glass in her throat, watched Felix's expression darken with rage as she spoke. Those narrow-minded, cruel. He stopped himself, visibly controlling his anger. His hands were fisted at his sides. "Isabella, I don't give a damn what they say." "But you should." Her voice rose, desperate. "You're a duke. You need an appropriate wife, heirs, a duchess who brings connections and impeccable breeding. Not some—" She couldn't finish. The words too painful. Felix started pacing, agitated in a way she'd never seen him. His usual careful control was cracking. Suddenly, he stopped, turned to face her. "Then marry me." Silence. Isabella stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "It's the perfect solution." The words came faster now, as though he was convincing himself as much as her. "An engagement will silence the gossips. As my fiancé, you'll be untouchable. No one will dare speak against a future duchess." "Felix, that's you, can't possibly. This is madness." "Why not? We're friends. We respect each other. Many marriages are built on far less. Friends. Respect, not love." Isabella felt her heart crack down the middle. "A convenient engagement," she said slowly. "Exactly. Temporary. Just until society fully accepts you. Then, if you wish, we can quietly end it. You'll be established, protected by having been engaged to me. You can make your own choices." He was still pacing, not meeting her eyes. "You'll be free." Every word was a knife. Isabella wanted to refuse, to protect what remained of her heart. But the practical part of her, The part that had survived Edward, the auction, everything knew this was safety. This was survival. "And what do you gain?" she asked quietly. Felix finally stopped pacing, but he looked away, toward the window. "Peace from my mother's machinations. The satisfaction of thwarting people like Constance, who think they can dictate my life." He paused, then added quietly, "And the pleasure of your company for a while longer." It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something. Something that made hope flicker dangerously in her chest. Isabella's pride warred with pragmatism. She should refuse, should walk away from this man who had saved her but could never truly be hers, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak. "This is madness," she repeated. "Perhaps." He finally met her eyes. "But will you accept?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Isabella nodded. "Yes, but Felix." She forced herself to say it, to set the boundary that would protect her when this ended. "When this ends, we part as friends. I won't cling or make demands. I won't become another obligation." "Agreed." His voice sounded hollow. They shook hands formally, like business partners sealing a contract. His hand was warm around hers, and Isabella felt the electricity of his touch travel up her arm, but she released him quickly, before she could do something foolish like, "Hold on." Both of them were dying inside. Both of them were lying about their true feelings, and both of them knew it. The engagement was announced the next day in the morning papers. Society exploded with speculation. Lady Constance was reportedly furious, though she maintained a gracious facade in public. The Dowager was satisfied she had seen this coming. Isabella suspected, had perhaps even orchestrated it. Felix's mother was coldly disapproving but said nothing publicly. A week later, Isabella and Felix attended the opera together, their first public appearance as an engaged couple. They sat in the Ashford family box, visible to everyone, playing the part of devoted lovers. Felix was attentive without being excessive, leaning close to explain the plot when her Italian faltered, his breath warm against her ear. Isabella smiled and laughed at the appropriate moments, acutely aware of every eye trained on them. During the intermission, their hands brushed as they both reached for the opera glasses. The touch sent electricity through Isabella's entire body. She saw Felix's breath catch, saw something flash in his eyes, desire, longing, something real beneath the convenient fiction. But they both pulled away. Both pretended not to feel it. Below them, society watched and whispered and speculated. The Duke of Ashford and his mysterious fiancée. A love match or something more calculated? Time would tell. As the lights dimmed for the second act, Felix's hand rested on the arm of his chair, inches from Isabella's. She stared at those fingers, remembering how they had felt wrapped around hers in the rose garden at Ashford Park. "You're becoming my reason," he had said. But that was before. Before the engagement, before the lies, before they had both agreed this was temporary and convenient, and nothing more. Isabella turned her attention to the stage and tried to ignore the ache in her chest that felt remarkably like heartbreak. Chapter 6. Fractures and Revelations. The engagement settled over Isabella and Felix like a silk shroud, beautiful on the surface, suffocating beneath. In public, they were the perfect couple. Felix was attentive without being excessive, guiding her through drawing rooms with a hand at her elbow, bringing her refreshments at balls, engaging her in conversation that appeared devoted. Isabella smiled and laughed at the appropriate moments, accepted compliments on her ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to Felix's grandmother, and played the role of blissfully happy fiancé. In private, they were careful, distant. Two people orbiting each other at a safe distance, terrified of what might happen if they drew too close. But the chemistry was undeniable. A lingering look across the breakfast table when Felix thought she wasn't watching. The accidental brush of hands when they both reached for the same book in the library. Conversations that started about trivial matters and somehow became deeper, more intimate, until one of them would remember the boundaries and pull back. They shared dinners at Ashford House most evenings, the Dowager often joining them. The older woman watched their careful dance with knowing amusement. "You two are fools if you think you're fooling anyone," she said one night after Isabella had excused herself early, claiming fatigue. Felix looked up from his brandy. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't, dear." The Dowager's smile was sharp. "Just as you don't know that you look at her the way your grandfather looked at me, just as you don't know that she leaves the room because being near you is painful when she can't have you. The engagement is temporary," we agreed. Oh, do stop lying to yourself, Frederick. It's beneath you. Felix had no response to that. 3 weeks into their engagement, a letter arrived for Isabella. She recognized the handwriting immediately loose and flowing. The I in Isabella, written with an elaborate flourish her mother had always favored. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Dearest Isabella, I hope this letter finds you well. I have heard of your engagement even here in Bath. The news travels. The Duke of Ashford. You have done extraordinarily well for yourself, my dear. I confess I write not merely to congratulate you, but to beg a favor. I find myself in rather desperate circumstances. The small pension I had has run out, and I am living in a boarding house of quite dismal character. My health is poor. The physician speaks of consumption, though I pray he is wrong. I know I failed you, dearest. I know I was not the mother you deserved after your dear father passed. But I am still your mother, the woman who gave you life. Surely your wealthy fiancé can spare something for me. Even a small sum would make such a difference. Your loving mother, Margaret. Isabella sat with the letter in her lap for a long time, feeling nothing. Then, slowly, feeling everything. Her mother had known what Edward planned, had known about the auction, and had done nothing, had abandoned Isabella to that fate, and then waited until she had clawed her way back to respectability before reappearing, hand outstretched. She wrote back that evening, her script tight and controlled. Mother, I am enclosing a bank draft for £50. It should be sufficient for your immediate needs. I have questions that I believe you owe me the courtesy of answering. Where were you when Edward sold me? Why did you abandon me to his care when you must have known what he was capable of? Isabella. The response arrived within 4 days, marked urgent, in her mother's hand. Isabella opened it in her room, away from curious eyes. The letter was longer this time, less carefully worded. Isabella, you want honesty? Very well. I fled when Edward's debts became unmanageable, because I am not a fool. I knew what was coming, and I had no intention of being dragged down with him. As for you, what could I have done? I had no money, no resources, no power to help you. Besides, you were always his burden, not mine. Your father's daughter, not truly part of our family. I did what I could by marrying Harold Worthington, giving you his name, his legitimacy. You should be grateful for that much. Send more money. £100 should suffice for now. Margaret. Isabella read the line again. Then again. Your father's daughter. Not Edward's. Not Harold Worthington's, the man she had believed was her father. Not part of our family. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. She told no one. Not Mrs. Winters, not the Dowager, not Felix. The next morning, she claimed she needed to visit a modist for her trousseau, and instead hired a post-chaise to Bath. The boarding house was everything Margaret had described, and worse, a grimy building in a questionable neighborhood, the kind of place people went when they had nowhere else to go. Isabella paid the driver to wait, and climbed the narrow stairs to the room number her mother had included in the letter. Margaret opened the door on the third knock. She was thinner than Isabella remembered, worn by drink and bitterness. Her once beautiful face was haggard, her dress stained and mended. For a moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other. Well, Margaret said finally, look at you. Quite the lady now, aren't you? Who was my father? Isabella's voice was steady, cold. Margaret smiled a bitter, ugly expression. Straight to it then. No pleasantries, no concern for your poor, suffering mother. Answer the question. Margaret stepped back, gesturing Isabella inside. The room was small, dingy, smelling of gin and desperation. Your father was Edmund Fairfax, the Earl of Thornbury. I was his mistress for 2 years. When I became pregnant, he paid me handsomely to disappear and never speak of it. I married Harold Worthington to give you legitimacy. Harold was kind enough to accept you as his own. The Earl of Thornbury. Isabella knew that name, everyone did. He had been disgraced 10 years ago for embezzlement and fraud, had fled to the continent to escape prosecution. He had died in exile 3 years later, penniless and alone. So you see, darling, Margaret continued, pouring herself gin from a bottle on the windowsill, you're not just poor, you're illegitimate, the bastard daughter of a criminal. I'm sure your Duke will be thrilled when he learns the truth. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell you the truth? You demanded it. Margaret took a long drink. Besides, it's rather relevant now, isn't it? Because I've written to the Dowager Duchess. A lovely letter explaining your situation, your true parentage, your illegitimacy. the criminal blood running through your veins. Isabella's breath caught. You're blackmailing me? I'm surviving, as I always have, as you should understand. Margaret's smile was venomous. Unless I receive a substantial sum, let's say £500, those letters will be delivered. Imagine the scandal. The Duke of Ashford, engaged to the bastard daughter of the disgraced Earl of Thornbury. Delicious, really. You're blackmailing your own daughter? You're not really my daughter, though, are you? You're Edmund's mistake that I've carried for 22 years. Time for you to pay me back for that burden. Isabella stood, shaking with rage and disgust, and a grief so profound it threatened to crush her. I will not give you money to hold over me for the rest of my life. Then I'll send the letters. Do what you will. You have no power over me anymore. She left before Margaret could respond, fled down the stairs and into the waiting carriage. She made it halfway to London before the shock wore off, and she started crying. By the time she reached Ashford House, it was late evening. She went directly to Felix's study, not caring about propriety or appearances. He looked up from his correspondence when she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. Isabella? What's happened? She told him everything. The letters, the trip to Bath, Margaret's revelations, the blackmail attempt. The words poured out in a torrent, and Felix listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet, processing. Isabella interpreted his silence as horror, disappointment, the inevitable realization that she was too damaged, too scandalous, too impossible. I understand if you wish to end the engagement, she said, her voice hollow. I won't contest it. You've done more than enough for me, and I won't let my mother's actions, my own history, harm you further. Felix stood slowly, came around the desk. Isabella, look at me. She couldn't. She was too ashamed, too broken. He stepped closer, gently lifting her chin until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. What she saw there wasn't horror or disappointment. It was fury, but not at her. Your mother, he said carefully, is a piece of work. Your biological father was a bastard and a criminal. And none of that, not one bit of it, diminishes who you are. I'm illegitimate, the daughter of a disgraced earl. This will destroy you. I don't give a damn about my reputation. His voice was fierce. But I do care about you. We'll handle your mother. We'll handle society. Together. That word together broke something in Isabella. The careful control she'd maintained since Bath shattered, and she started crying. Not delicate tears, but ugly, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Felix pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him like a drowning woman. His arms were solid around her, one hand stroking her hair, his voice a steady murmur against her ear. I've got you. I promise, I've got you. In that moment, with her face pressed against his chest and his heart beating steadily beneath her cheek, Isabella realized the truth she'd been avoiding. She loved him. Completely, irrevocably, impossibly. Felix, holding her, felt her tears soaking through his shirt and realized his own truth. He was in love with her, had been for weeks, maybe months. Perhaps from the moment he'd seen her on that auction platform and felt his heart crack at her dignity in the face of such degradation, but neither spoke the words. The moment was too fragile, too complicated. There was still Margaret to handle, still society to face, still the impossible gap between what they wanted and what they could have. Felix handled Margaret with ruthless efficiency. He sent his solicitor to Bath with a contract, £500 paid immediately, with the legal stipulation that any future contact with Isabella or attempts at blackmail would result in criminal prosecution for extortion. Margaret signed without reading it thoroughly, took the money, and disappeared to the continent within a week. I'm sorry you had to, Isabella started, when Felix told her it was done. Stop. His voice was gentle but firm. Your mother's actions are not your responsibility. Her choices are not your shame. But the damage was done. Isabella now saw herself as permanently tainted, illegitimate, daughter of a criminal, born of scandal. The engagement that had seemed impossible before now felt like a cruel joke. That night, alone in her room, Isabella wrote a letter. Dearest Felix, I cannot continue with this arrangement. You deserve so much better than the bastard daughter of a disgraced earl. You deserve a duchess who brings honor to your name, not scandal and shame. Please know that my time with you has been the happiest of my life. You saved me in every way. A person can be saved, and I will carry that gratitude, always. But I cannot in good conscience allow you to sacrifice yourself for me. I release you from our engagement. Consider yourself free of all obligations. Yours, Isabella. She sealed the letter with wax, her hands steady. Tomorrow, she would deliver it to him. Tomorrow, she would end this before it destroyed them both. Tonight, she would allow herself to weep for what could never be. Chapter 7. Public Reckoning. The morning light was pale and new when Felix broke the seal on Isabella's letter. He read it standing in his study, still in his shirt sleeves, his morning coffee cooling forgotten on the desk. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something harder, determination edged with fury. Not at Isabella, never at her, but at the circumstances that had convinced her she was unworthy of love. He set down the letter with deliberate care and strode from the room. Isabella was in the morning room, staring blankly at a plate of toast she had no intention of eating. She had slept perhaps 2 hours, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Today she would tell Felix in person, would face him while she destroyed the fragile happiness they had built. The door opened without warning. Felix stood in the doorway, still disheveled from his morning routine, her letter clenched in his hand. His expression was thunderous. "You're not ending this engagement." Isabella stood, her heart hammering. "Felix, I have to. I won't ruin you." He crossed the room in 3 strides, close enough that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, the barely controlled emotion in his eyes. "What if I don't want you to end it? What if this stopped being convenient weeks ago?" Isabella's breath caught. "What are you saying?" For a moment, she thought he would say it would speak the words that hung between them like a prayer. But Felix pulled back slightly, not quite ready to make the full declaration. Not here, not like this, not in private, where she could dismiss it as pity or obligation. "I'm saying you don't get to make decisions for me," he said, his voice rough. "We're going to the Marlborough Ball tonight, together, as an engaged couple, and we're going to face whatever comes. Agreed?" Isabella wanted to refuse, wanted to protect him from the scandal that was coming, but the hope in his voice, the fierce determination in his eyes, made her helpless. "Agreed," she whispered. That evening, the Duke of Marlborough's townhouse blazed with light. Every window glowed, every chandelier sparkled, every candle flickered in welcome. The ball was the event of the season. Everyone who mattered was present, and everyone who didn't matter desperately wished they were. Isabella stood before her mirror while Mrs. Winters made final adjustments to her gown. The Dowager had commissioned it specifically for tonight, deep sapphire silk that brought out the green in Isabella's eyes, cut to perfection, making her look regal rather than merely pretty. "You look like a queen," Mrs. Winters said softly. "I feel like a sacrifice," Isabella admitted. "Then hold your head high, dear. Sacrifices should at least have dignity." Felix was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, resplendent in black evening clothes that made him look every inch the Duke. When he saw Isabella descending, something flickered in his expression, awe, possession, and something deeper that made her breath catch. He offered his arm. "Ready?" "No, but I'll do it anyway." His smile was brief, but genuine. "That's my girl. My girl." The words wrapped around Isabella's heart and squeezed. They entered the Marlborough ballroom together, and the effect was immediate. Conversation didn't precisely stop, but it faltered, dimmed, as every eye in the room turned to assess them. The Duke of Ashford and his controversial fiancée. Isabella felt the weight of those stares like physical pressure. She forced herself to breathe, to remember Monsieur Archambault's lessons about posture, to maintain the graceful composure she had learned. Lady Constance was there, beautiful and cold in ice-blue silk that matched her eyes. She stood near the musicians' platform, surrounded by a coterie of ladies who hung on her every word. When she saw Isabella, her smile was predatory. She had been waiting for this moment. The evening proceeded with agonizing slowness. Isabella danced with Felix, with other gentlemen who were either brave or curious enough to request her hand. She conversed, smiled, played her part perfectly. But the tension was palpable, building like a storm about to break. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. During supper, Constance made her move. The ballroom had a raised area where the musicians sat during breaks. Constance stood near it, champagne glass in hand, laughing at something one of her companions had said. Then, with what appeared to be perfect clumsiness but was actually practiced timing, she dropped the glass. Crystal shattered against marble with a sound like breaking ice. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Constance exclaimed, pressing a hand to her chest. "I'm so sorry, everyone. How mortifying." She laughed, bright and false. Though, speaking of accidents, she turned, her gaze finding Isabella with laser precision. Miss Worthington, I've been meaning to ask about your family. I've been researching genealogies recently, such a fascinating hobby, don't you agree? And I cannot seem to place the Worthingtons in Debrett's. Her smile was poisonous sweetness, though I did find something rather intriguing about a Margaret Thornbury. She was mistress to the late Earl of Thornbury, wasn't she? You wouldn't happen to know anything about that? The room froze. Isabella felt every eye turned to her, felt the weight of their judgment and curiosity, and barely concealed glee at the scandal unfolding. Constance continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast ballroom. The dates would suggest, well, it would suggest that any daughter of Margaret's might actually be the illegitimate daughter of a disgraced criminal. The Earl of Thornbury embezzlement, fraud, died in exile. Can you imagine? Such a person attempting to enter our society, to marry a duke? This was worse than the auction. At least then, Isabella had been among strangers who meant nothing to her. Here, surrounded by the cream of society, exposed and humiliated in front of Felix's peers, his family, his world, this was a nightmare made flesh. The dowager started to stand, her face thunderous with rage. Felix's mother looked shocked. Around the room, whispers began to rise like a tide. But Felix was faster. He stood, took Isabella's trembling hand in his, and stepped forward into the center of attention. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and carrying a duke accustomed to being heard. Lady Constance, your research is as thorough as it is vindictive. Constance's smile faltered slightly. Felix continued, his grip on Isabella's hand tightening. Yes, Isabella's parentage is complicated. Her biological father was Edmund Fairfax, the Earl of Thornbury. She is, by the narrowest legal definition, illegitimate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Constance's smile returned, triumphant. Around them, people began to murmur scandal, disgrace, deception. Felix's voice cut through the noise like a blade. And yet, in the past months, I have come to know Isabella Worthington better than I have known most people in my entire life. The room quieted again, people leaning forward to hear. She is intelligent, compassionate, resilient beyond measure. She has endured cruelties that would have broken most people in this room, myself included. He turned to Isabella, speaking to her but projecting his voice so everyone could hear. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget the hundreds of people watching. She survived years of neglect and abuse at the hands of a stepfather who saw her as nothing more than property. She survived being sold at auction like chattel, yes, Lady Constance. That's the detail you left out. Isabella's stepfather auctioned her to pay his gambling debts. She survived her own mother's betrayal and blackmail, and through all of that, she remained kind. She remained hopeful. She remained herself. Isabella's vision blurred with tears. She tried to look away, but Felix held her gaze. He turned back to the crowd, his voice ringing with conviction. I have a title. I have wealth and position. I can trace my lineage back 12 generations, every one legitimate and properly documented. And not a single one of those ancestors, not one had half the character, half the courage, half the fundamental worth that Isabella Worthington possesses. The dowager was openly smiling now, dabbing at her eyes. Felix's mother looked shocked, but not, Isabella noticed with amazement, disapproving. Around the room, expressions were shifting, some still scandalized, but others thoughtful, moved. Felix turned fully to Isabella, his voice dropping to something more intimate, despite their very public audience. When I proposed our engagement, I called it convenient. I lied. He took both her hands now, heedless of propriety. There's nothing convenient about falling in love with you. It's been complicated and frightening, and the best thing that's ever happened to me. Isabella's eyes widened, tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. Felix, in front of everyone who mattered in London society, said the words he should have said weeks ago. I don't want a fake engagement. I don't want a temporary arrangement. His voice was fierce, certain. Isabella Worthington, illegitimate daughter, survivor. The strongest person I know, will you marry me? For real, forever. The ballroom was utterly silent. Even the musicians had stopped tuning their instruments. Hundreds of people held their breath. Isabella could barely speak through her tears. Felix, your reputation, what they'll say. Damn my reputation, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Answer the question. She saw everything in his eyes, love, determination, absolute certainty. He was choosing her, publicly, irrevocably, without reservation. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you." Felix kissed her. Not a chaste engagement kiss, not a polite peck appropriate for public viewing. He kissed her like a man claiming his future, like a declaration of war against anyone who would try to separate them. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Isabella forgot the audience, forgot the scandal, forgot everything, except the feeling of finally being exactly where she belonged. The dowager stood and began to applaud, her face bright with triumph and joy. Slowly, others joined her. Not everyone, Lady Constance fled the room. Several older matrons followed in righteous indignation. Various scandalized guests made their exits. But enough remained, enough to matter. The music resumed, a waltz. Felix swept Isabella into his arms and onto the dance floor, and the world narrowed to just the two of them, spinning together while society watched and whispered and adjusted. "You really love me?" Isabella whispered against his shoulder. "Desperately," Felix murmured back. "Have for weeks, maybe longer. I was just too much of a coward to say it. I love you too. I think I have since you carried me out of that auction house. Then we're both fools who wasted time." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her and seen her and chosen her despite everything. "We have all the time now. All the time in the world," he agreed, and kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a declaration. The ball continued around them. Society was divided, some scandalized beyond repair, some moved by the romantic gesture, most simply fascinated by the drama. But the declaration had been made, the choice announced, the line drawn. Late that night, after they had escaped the ball and returned to Ashford House, Isabella and Felix found themselves in the garden. The same garden where she had broken down after the disastrous dinner party, where he had first told her she was strong. "Your mother will never fully forgive me," Isabella said quietly, looking up at the stars. "My mother will adjust. Or she won't. It doesn't matter." Felix's arm was around her waist, solid and sure. "She doesn't get to dictate my life. Society will always whisper. Let them whisper, Isabella. I spent 3 years running from life after Beatrice died, running from grief, from responsibility, from anything that mattered. Then I found you, or you found me, and I remembered why life matters, why fighting for what's right matters, why love matters." He turned her to face him. "I'm not losing you to anyone's expectations, not society's, not my mother's, not yours." Isabella touched his face, this beautiful, broken, healing man who had chosen her. "I was so afraid," she admitted, "afraid I would destroy you." "You saved me," he corrected. "You made me remember who I wanted to be." They stood together in the garden, looking at the stars, two damaged people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen light, both scarred, both healing, both brave enough to believe in tomorrow. "Thank you," Isabella whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me despite everything." Felix kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "Thank you for letting me." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama. But here, in this garden, two people had made their stand against the world, and won. Chapter 8. Beginning Again. 3 months later, spring had fully arrived at Ashford Park. The gardens that had been dormant when Isabella first came here were now ablaze, with colour roses climbing ancient stone walls, wisteria draping the pergolas in purple cascades, beds of tulips and daffodils nodding in the gentle breeze. Isabella stood in the rose bedroom where she had first slept as the dowager's student, but everything was different now. Then she had been broken, uncertain, clinging to hope like a lifeline. Now, on her wedding morning, she was whole, not unmarked by what she had endured, but no longer defined by it. Mrs. Winters fussed with the wedding gown, cream silk with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline, elegant in its simplicity. The housekeeper's eyes were bright with tears. "I knew from the first night," she said, adjusting the fall of fabric, "when His Grace carried you in, all protective and fierce, trying to pretend it was just charity. I told Cook, that man's found his match." And I was right. Isabella smiled, touching the older woman's hand. "You've been so kind to me, from the very beginning. It's easy to be kind to someone who deserves it, dear." A knock at the door, and the dowager entered, regal in pewter silk. She carried a velvet box. "May I have a moment with the bride?" Mrs. Winters curtsied and withdrew, closing the door softly behind her. The dowager approached, studying Isabella with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look beautiful, child. But more than that, you look happy." "I am. Because of you. Because you saw something in me worth saving." "Nonsense. I simply provided opportunity. You did the saving yourself." The dowager opened the box, revealing a sapphire necklace the deep blue of twilight, surrounded by diamonds that caught the morning light. "Something borrowed. My late husband gave this to me when we married. I wore it when I defied my parents to become his wife." Isabella's breath caught. "Your Grace, I couldn't." "He was a second son," the dowager continued, as though Isabella hadn't spoken. "Considered beneath me by my family's standards. My parents wanted me to marry an earl, someone with title and position to match my own. But Robert—" Her expression softened with memory. "He was the love of my life. Kind, intelligent, passionate about reforming the very system that would have kept us apart." Isabella understood now the mysterious past, the reason the dowager had helped her. "You were the girl with potential but no opportunity. I was lucky. My parents eventually accepted him, though it took years. But I never forgot how close I came to losing him to propriety, to other people's expectations." The dowager's eyes grew sharp again. "When I saw you, saw the way Frederick looked at you as though you were the answer to a question he'd forgotten he'd asked, I wasn't going to let history repeat itself." Isabella embraced her, this formidable woman who had become so much more than a sponsor. "Thank you, for everything, for seeing me, for fighting for me." The dowager returned the embrace, brief but genuine. "Thank you for loving my grandson, for reminding him what it means to truly live." The chapel at Ashford Park was small and ancient, built of grey stone that had stood for 4 centuries. Spring flowers filled every available surface, white roses, purple irises, delicate sprays of cherry blossoms. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in jeweled colors. The guests were few but meaningful. Felix's mother sat in the front row, still reserved but with something softer in her expression than Isabella had seen before. Lord Thomas Garrett, Felix's closest friend, a man who had supported their relationship from the beginning, another soul disillusioned by society's cruelties, who had found purpose in fighting against them, stood beside Felix at the altar. And in the third row sat 3 women Isabella had come to know over the past months. Anne, rescued from domestic servitude to a brutal employer. Catherine, who had been promised in marriage to a man 3 times her age to settle her father's debts. Elizabeth, widowed and destitute, about to be evicted and forced into the workhouse. All of them saved by the Isabella Worthington Foundation for Women's Welfare, the project Isabella and the dowager had been building together. A refuge for women in desperate circumstances, funded by the dowager's wealth and Felix's resources, guided by Isabella's understanding of what it meant to need rescue. The women watched her with gratitude and hope, living proof that one person's transformation could ripple outward, could change other lives. The music began. A simple melody played on the chapel's old organ. Isabella walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away, because she belonged to herself. She had insisted on this, and Felix had understood immediately why it mattered. He stood at the altar in dove grey, his dark eyes fixed on her with such love that Isabella felt it like a physical warmth. Lord Thomas smiled beside him, obviously pleased to see his friend happy at last. When Isabella reached Felix, he took her hands, and the vicar began the ceremony. The vows were traditional, the words worn smooth by centuries of repetition. But when it came time for personal additions, Felix's voice rang clear. "I vow to see you, always, not as you were or as society defines you, but as you are extraordinary." Isabella's voice was steady despite her tears. "I vow to stand with you, not behind you, to be your partner in all things, especially in changing the world that tried to break us both." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Felix kissed her with pure joy, not just passion or possession, but the simple happiness of 2 people who had found home in each other. The reception was held in the gardens, beneath a canopy of wisteria. It was elegant but warm, nothing like the formal balls that dominated London society. Tables laden with food, champagne flowing freely, laughter and genuine conversation rather than pointed gossip. Felix's mother approached Isabella during the meal, drawing her aside to a quiet corner of the garden. "I owe you an apology," the Duchess said stiffly. "I was wrong about what Frederick needed. I thought duty and propriety would make him happy, would honor his father's memory." She paused, choosing words carefully. "I've never seen my son truly happy until you. I was wrong about what he needed, wrong about you. It wasn't a warm embrace or effusive declaration, but it was genuine. Isabella accepted it for what it was. Thank you, Your Grace. That means more than you know." A servant approached with a silver salver bearing a single letter. "This just arrived for Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashford." Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashford. The title still felt strange, too large for her to inhabit. Isabella opened the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature made her breath catch. Edward Worthington. "Isabella, I heard about the wedding. I won't trouble you. I know I have no right to any part of your life, but I wanted you to know that I was cruel because I was weak. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Congratulations on your marriage, Edward." Isabella showed it to Felix, who had appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. He read it, his expression carefully neutral. "How do you feel?" "Nothing," Isabella said, surprised by the truth of it. "Is that wrong?" "No." Felix folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. "He doesn't deserve your hatred or your forgiveness. Nothing is exactly what he's earned." As afternoon turned to evening, the dowager stood to make a toast. Her voice carried across the garden, commanding attention effortlessly. "I have lived a long life and seen much. I have seen love destroyed by propriety, crushed by convention, sacrificed to expectation." She looked at Felix and Isabella, her eyes bright. "But I have also seen love defy the odds. Today, we celebrate not just a marriage, but a triumph. 2 people who refuse to let the world dictate their worth or their future. To the Duke and Duchess of Ashford." "Here, here," Lord Thomas called out, raising his glass. "Though I should add I've known Felix for 15 years, and I've never seen him smile this much. It's actually rather unsettling. I keep checking to make sure he's not ill." Laughter rippled through the guests. Mrs. Winters stood, wiping happy tears. "To love," she said simply, "the kind that sees us through." As twilight painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Felix took Isabella's hand and led her away from the celebration, through the formal gardens to the rose garden, where they had shared so many significant moments. "Do you remember the first time we talked here?" Felix asked, settling beside her on the stone bench. "You were convinced you'd fail. I remember you telling me that strength was getting back up." Isabella leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "You gave me hope when I had none." "I was a hypocrite," Felix admitted. "I'd been down for 3 years after Beatrice died, and I hadn't gotten up. Not really. You're the one who showed me how." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light change, the shadows lengthen. Finally, Isabella spoke, her voice thoughtful. "Sometimes I still feel her, the girl on that auction block, terrified and certain her life was over." "What do you tell her?" Felix asked gently. "That she was right, that life did end. But something better began, something she couldn't have imagined even in her wildest hopes." Felix took her hand, threading their fingers together. "We've been discussing the foundation, but I have another idea. I want to use my position in the House of Lords to push for legal reforms. Debtors' prisons, women's property rights, child welfare protections. You'd face significant opposition. Let them oppose. I have you. We'll face them together." "Together," Isabella echoed, testing the word, finding it solid and true. "I still can't quite believe this is real." "Believe it. You're a duchess now, the Duchess of Ashford. Society will have to adjust." He kissed her temple. "Though I should warn you, my mother is already making pointed comments about heirs." Isabella laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. "One battle at a time, Your Grace." They returned to the reception as stars began to appear. Lanterns had been lit, their warm glow creating pools of golden light. Music played, and Felix led Isabella in one final dance, just the 2 of them in the center of the garden, while their guests watched and smiled. 1 year later, the Isabella Worthington Foundation for Women's Welfare occupied a gracious townhouse in Bloomsbury. Isabella stood in the entrance hall with a young woman named Sarah, who clutched a small bag containing all her worldly possessions. "This is the main sitting room," Isabella explained, leading Sarah through rooms that had been carefully designed to feel safe rather than institutional. "You'll share a bedroom with 2 other residents until we can arrange more permanent lodging. There's a library, a workroom where we teach various skills, and a small garden." Sarah was 19, thin and frightened, with bruises fading on her wrists. Her family had sold her to their landlord to settle back rent. The foundation had intervened before the transaction was completed, but the trauma was fresh and raw. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Isabella led her to a private corner, sat beside her on a comfortable sofa. "I know you're frightened. I know everything feels impossible right now. But I promise you, this is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning." "How can you know that?" Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "Because I was you." Isabella took the girl's hand gently. 3 years ago, I stood on an auction block while men bid on me like livestock. I thought my life was over, but it wasn't, and neither is yours." Sarah stared at her, processing this revelation. You're the Duchess of Ashford." "I am, but I'm also Isabella, who understands what it means to be treated as property, who knows what it takes to rebuild yourself from nothing, and I'm telling you, you are stronger than you know." The front door opened, and Felix entered, still in riding clothes from a morning session at the House of Lords. He greeted Sarah warmly, welcoming her to the foundation, making her feel like a person rather than a charity case. As they prepared to leave, Isabella saw Sarah watching them, this Duke and Duchess, who believed in second chances because they had lived them. In the carriage home, Isabella leaned against Felix's shoulder, comfortable and content. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The scandal, the gossip, choosing me over propriety?" Felix didn't even hesitate. Not for a single second. "You? I regret that I doubted you. Doubted us, but nothing else." "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "Because I'm not letting you go. Not in this lifetime." Isabella smiled, then took a breath. "In that case, I should tell you something. I spoke with the physician this morning." She felt Felix tense. "Are you unwell?" "Quite the opposite." She turned to look at him, watching his expression carefully. "It seems in about 7 months you'll get your heir, or heiress." For a moment, Felix simply stared. Then his face broke into the widest smile Isabella had ever seen. Pure, unguarded joy. He pulled her close, careful but ecstatic. "A child, our child, our child," Isabella confirmed, her own smile matching his. "Who will grow up knowing they're loved, knowing their worth isn't determined by circumstances of birth, knowing they can become anything, knowing they have the most extraordinary mother in England," Felix added, his voice thick with emotion. The carriage rolled through London streets toward Ashford House, carrying them home. Inside, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford held each other, 2 survivors who had found love, 2 damaged people who had chosen healing, 2 souls who had proved that worth was inherent, not assigned. Isabella's final thought, unspoken but deeply felt. "I was sold for £200, but I found something priceless myself, and him, and this life we're building together. A life where the girl from the auction block became a duchess, not despite her past, but carrying it with her as proof that no one is beyond redemption, and no circumstance defines our ending." And so Isabella's journey comes to full circle, from the darkness of that auction house to the light of a love that defied every expectation. From a girl who was sold for £200 to a duchess who found something truly priceless, herself, her purpose, and a partnership built on genuine respect and unwavering devotion. If Isabella and Felix's story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What was your favorite moment from their journey? Was it Felix's dramatic rescue, Isabella's transformation at Ashford Park, or perhaps that powerful public declaration at the Marlborough Ball? And here's a question for you. Do you believe love can truly heal our deepest wounds, or does it simply give us the strength to heal ourselves? I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience, redemption, and romance, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. It truly helps Lyra's romance stories reach more listeners who crave these emotionally rich historical romances. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. I have so many more sweeping romances planned for you, tales of forbidden love, second chances, and characters who refuse to let their circumstances define their destiny. Share this story with someone who loves a good enemies to lovers tale, or anyone who believes that our past doesn't determine our worth. Isabella's story reminds us that we are all capable of transformation, that dignity can survive even the darkest circumstances, and that true love sees us not as we were, but as we are. Thank you so much for spending this time with Isabella and Felix. Thank you for believing in their love story, for rooting for Isabella's strength, and for understanding that the most powerful romances are the ones where both people save each other. Until next time, remember, you are not defined by your worst moments. You are defined by how you rise from them. This is Lyra, and I'll see you in the next romance.